Welcome back. I'm joined now by Matthew Warren for a look at the latest business headlines. Now, François Hollande's been taking on the business community, trying to convince entrepreneurs that he is in fact business friendly. Has he managed it?
Well, we'll be finding out because, of course, last year a group of entrepreneurs said that they felt a lot of the government's plans were actually going to throttle business creation here in France. And a group of them got together. They called themselves the Pigeons because pigeon in French, as well as meaning the bird, also means sucker. And they were very angry about tax plans that they said could cost them up to 60% when they sold assets that they created. Well, the president, we can see there, gathered together around 300 of those entrepreneurs, and this is what he proposed, amongst other things. He said that, in fact, for assets held more than 2 years, he would give them tax breaks around 50%, even more than that for assets held longer. Well, we are joined here in the studio by the man who is the spokesperson for the Pigeons, Jean-David Chamboredon. Thanks very much for joining us. You're also chief executive of a venture capital firm, EZE. Well, first of all, given those very generous tax breaks that the president has now been talking about, you should be pretty happy.
You know, generous is probably exaggerated. I would say we are back to normal. The increase of capital gain tax in the fall 2012 was absolutely terrible. And now with the new scheme that has been proposed by the president, we are back to a normal country, and that's a good thing for the country.
In broad terms, how business friendly would you say that France is today?
You know, I think France needs SMBs, small and medium businesses, and I think the government has understood that. We had a long conversation for the last 5 months with the government about what kind of issues we were facing. And if France wants to get rid of unemployment and really create new jobs, we need SMBs, we need startups. And basically what was told yesterday by the president was we understand that.
And so the government has changed its opinion to some extent. But what about generally here in France? What's the attitude towards business creation here in France?
You know, one proposal that was made yesterday was to introduce some kind of teaching of entrepreneurship at schools, high schools, universities. I think that's a big change because, you know, French education has always been quite risk adverse, and teaching entrepreneurship is about teaching risk. So that's a big change.
What other measures? So that we've outlined a couple of things that they seem to be acting on. You mentioned education and attitudes towards business creation. What other concrete steps is your association calling for the president to take? What would make a big difference that they're not doing for the time being?
You know, this capital gain tax was clearly at the heart of the pigeon movement, and we think that the decision made yesterday are very positive. We obviously expect them to be translated into the law, and this will happen in September. So we will still be, cautious, waiting for that to be really in place. But the message is clearly very positive.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Jean-David Chamboredon. Thank you very much for having been our guest this morning. Matthew, we're going to move on to some of the rest of the business news. Give us an idea of how the markets are looking.
Yeah, let's take a look at, first of all, how things wrapped up on Wall Street in Monday's trading session. And markets all finished the day up by about 0.75%. The S&P 500 there actually reaching a record high. Now, in Asia, markets have also been making gains for the most part. The Nikkei is pretty flat, and the Shanghai Composite, in fact, no figures there because it is closed for the day. The Nikkei, as you can see, they're just slightly falling off, very slightly.
Now moving on to Bangladesh, which is clearly still in the news this morning as the search dims for survivors, but the rubble continues to be cleared there. We're hearing also, of course, Matthew, that 2 companies are now offering compensation over the collapse of the factory.
Yes, so now we've got Canada's Loblaws and also Britain's Primark, both saying that they will offer compensation after that terrible collapse that we saw last week, leading to so many deaths. Well, for garment producers in Bangladesh, it's an incredibly important industry for them, and they want to make sure that both safety is improved, but also that they keep their industry intact. Luke Shrego has more.
Mohammed Sahel Rana faced his first court appearance in a bulletproof vest on Monday. The owner of a garment factory that collapsed in Bangladesh last week, hundreds died in the accident, and protesters were baying for Rana's blood. The sheer scale of the disaster left the nation in shock, and other manufacturers scrambling to salvage a crumbling reputation in the face of international condemnation.
We can write a letter to all the diplomats, to all the foreign and representative here, embassies and all here, that we need the support and the expertise, that this is the condition now, our building condition, how you can come, and if the building is weak, how we can reinforce that building.
Bangladesh is the world's #2 textiles exporter after China, the industry itself worth 80% of the nation's exports. Manufacturers in the South Asian country fear the loss of that revenue and the cost to some 4 million people reliant on the industry for their livelihoods. But Western retailers are demanding action over safety issues.
But we have to see something credible, and that credible has to be a top-down approach where there is full commitment.
Certain retailers who had clothing manufactured at the collapsed factory have vowed they'll provide compensation to families of the victims. However, it seems Bangladesh will have to do all it can to minimise the risk of such accidents if it wants to protect an industry worth €15 billion.
Let's get some more of the day's company news now. And Alibaba, China's biggest e-commerce group, has gone shopping. It's bought an 18% stake in Weibo, the country's largest Twitter-like messaging service. That deal's worth $580 million. It's seen as a way for Alibaba to drive some of Weibo's 500 million users to its own sites.
China's appetite for technology shows no sign of slowing down. Its personal computer market is now the world's biggest. 69 million units were shipped last year, overtaking the US. China also has the highest number of internet users at 500 million.
And in Spain, the head of the Santander Bank is stepping down. Alfredo Sáenz has been under investigation by the Spanish Central Bank. He was convicted for making false accusations in 2009 and was sentenced to a brief jail sentence that was later suspended.
Now, Matthew, plans to start passenger flights into space come a step closer yesterday.
That's right, but I'm not sure you're going to be a taker of these,
no,
are you,
not.
Melissa?
You won't get me anywhere near it. No.
Well, plenty of people have been, though. 500 have already reserved for these space flights, paying a deposit on their $200,000 ticket price. The first test flight seemed to go well, and Richard Branson, who's bankrolling the project, seemed very happy with the first test flight.
Yeah, first commercial space line to break the sound barrier on its very first test flight. Couldn't have gone more smoothly. We just talked to the pilots. They actually were thinking of just saying, screw everybody, we're going into space. but anyway, they didn't.
It is 51 minutes past 7 here in Paris. Coming up in just a moment, web news, and we give you the opportunity to date superheroes. We'll be hearing all about that in just a moment.